The content on the Untold Tales channel is protected by copyright. Unauthorized use may result in legal liability. The rain drizzled in a fine, sticky veil, turning the ground underfoot into mud. Droplets ran down black umbrellas, fell onto dark coats, soaking the expensive fabric, but no one moved. The air was laden with the smell of wet leaves and damp earth. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the cemetery fence, a car drove by, its hum dissolving in the deaf silence. James Coulter stood before the open grave, staring at the massive black coffin covered with white lilies. Her favorite flowers. He didn't move, didn't blink, barely breathed. People around stood silently, heads bowed. Someone sobbed, someone furtively wiped away tears. They offered him words of condolence, but he didn't hear. He just looked at the coffin, at the flowers, at the tombstone on which her name was engraved. His fingers were clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms, but he didn't even feel it. Wife. Dead. The thought seemed foreign, incorrect, as if it had been forcibly implanted in his head. James had always controlled his life. Always. He was accustomed to planning ahead, used to spotting threats before they emerged. His entire life had been built like a military operation. Clear steps, clear objectives, no weakness. But now, he felt as if the ground had been swept from under his feet. Beside him stood Vince Carlisle, friend, partner, someone he had known since their service days. Vince was the only one who didn't try to intrude with empty words of comfort. He simply stood by, allowing James to go through this in his own way. "If you want, we can wait," Vince said softly. James didn't respond immediately. Only after a few seconds did he slightly nod his head. "It's all right. Continue." His voice was hollow, as if it were someone else's. The preacher, a tall, gray-haired man in a strict robe, stepped forward and raised his hands, drawing the attention of those gathered. "We are here to say goodbye to a remarkable woman, a loving wife, a kind friend." The words sounded somewhere on the periphery of consciousness, turning into meaningless noise. Loving wife. Friend. James closed his eyes. Memories engulfed him, pulling him into the past. He remembered meeting her for the first time. New York. A hot summer evening. A party he'd been almost forcibly dragged to. The clink of glasses, soft jazz music, the smell of champagne, and expensive cigars. He disliked such events, couldn't stand superficial conversations and ostentatious smiles. And then he saw her. She was laughing, head thrown back, long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint, her lips curved in a smile full of some audacious confidence. She met his gaze and, without looking away, headed straight toward him. "Do you always look at women as if assessing a potential threat?" He slightly raised an eyebrow. "Habit. What if I say it's a bad habit? Then perhaps you're the threat." She laughed. "I'm a friend, James. Remember that." He remembered. Then there were long talks, long nights, kisses under streetlight. Their first apartment, tiny but cozy. Their first argument, the first gift. Every memory was vivid, warm, real. But now all of it was buried under the wet earth. May the Lord rest her soul. The preacher's voice brought him back to reality. James opened his eyes. The rain intensified. He took a deep breath, but it didn't lighten his heart. And suddenly, the phone in his pocket vibrated. He mechanically lowered his hand, pulled it out, and looked at the screen. Live broadcast. Home security cameras. He frowned and tapped on the notification. The vibration in his pocket was barely perceptible, but in the silence that enveloped the cemetery, it sounded like thunder amidst clear skies. James Coulter slowly lowered his gaze. His fingers, cold and tense, themselves slid into the pocket of his black coat and retrieved the phone. The screen lit up with a pale light, reflecting in the raindrops streaming down his hands. Live broadcast. Security cameras. James' brow furrowed slightly. Why now? Why at the funeral? Security knows not to disturb him without a good reason. A brief pause. Then he pressed the screen. The sound was faint, but the camera clearly conveyed what was happening. In the frame appeared his bedroom. Soft, subdued light. The snow-white bed linens in which they once slept together. Those very sheets he himself had ordered from an expensive boutique on her birthday. And two, naked. The phone in his hand seemed to grow heavier. His wife. The wife he had just buried. Her body arched in passion, her skin glistening with sweat, her hands greedily digging into the shoulders of the man above her. She is alive. She is not dead. She is not in the coffin. She is not beneath this damp, sticky layer of earth being washed away by the rain. She is at home, having sex, in their bed. Her lips were parted in moans, her eyes half closed, her fingers scratching someone else's skin. She knew what she was doing. She was enjoying it. The man moved with confidence. He grabbed her hair. He whispered something in her ear. He was large, tanned. Who is he? What does it matter? The frames changed. The cameras switched automatically, as if someone was playing with the settings, savoring each moment. Another angle. Now her face was clearer. Eyes wide open, lips moist, back arched. Eyes. They looked straight into the lens. As if she knew. As if she was waiting. As if she wanted him to see. His pulse throbbed in his temples. The air became thick like tar. James did not blink. Everything around seemed to disappear. He no longer heard the rain. Didn't hear someone sobbing behind him. Didn't hear the preacher's words. Only her moans. Only the lovers breathing. Only the dull rhythm of their bodies. His fingers gripped the phone so hard that the glass might crack. His throat was dry. He couldn't swallow. Did he feel pain? No. Anger? No. He felt nothing. James called her, a man who had been through wars, seen blood, death, torture. He could endure pain. He could endure everything. But this was something else. Something that did not fit into his world. Something he could not control. He slowly closed the phone, lowered his hand, and looked up, straight at the preacher, who was delivering his mournful speech, continuing to utter meaningless words about fidelity, love, memory. A moment of silence. Then James stepped forward. Stop. His voice was even but sharp. The preacher fell silent. The workers at the grave stopped. People began to look around, not understanding what was happening. James took a deep breath. Day. A whisper passed among the crowd. People froze, confused, tense. What? Vince asked softly, peering into his face, trying to understand what was happening. But James was no longer listening. He knew what he would find, and he knew it would change everything. Rain pelted the ground with heavy drops, turning the loose soil around the grave into muddy slush. The air smelled of wet grass, damp wood, and freshly dug earth, as if nature itself felt that something more than just a body would be buried here today. James Coulter stood at the edge of the grave, motionless, like a figure carved from granite. His gaze was fixed on the coffin, but his thoughts were not here. They burned his consciousness, tearing him apart from the inside, turning every moment into an agony of realization. He had just seen the impossible. The wife he had kept in his heart, whom he had thought dead, was alive. And not just alive. She was having sex with another man right in their marital bed. Her moans, her laughter, her look directed right into the camera lens. All of it knocked the ground out from under his feet. James closed the phone. His fingers whitened from the force with which he clutched the device. Breathing became heavy, even. His heart beat slowly, measuredly like before a battle. He raised his head. Stop. His voice was even, but in the complete silence of the cemetery, it rang out like a gunshot. The preacher froze with raised hands. People exchanged glances, not understanding what was happening. Someone sobbed, someone coughed quietly, but no one dared to speak. Jameis' eyes were as cold as winter ice. He took a step forward. Dig a new grave. The words sounded harsh, uncompromising. Vince Carlisle frowned, stepped closer, and spoke cautiously, almost in a whisper. James, are you okay? But he did not answer. He was no longer the man who had come here to say goodbye to his wife. His gaze found the face he needed in the crowd. Christopher Shaw, the man who first told him about his wife's death. The person who brought news of the tragedy, who stood before him a few days ago with a repentant expression and said that it's all over. But now James knew the truth. He looked carefully at Shaw and saw everything. Dilated pupils, a slight movement of the jaw, sweat beads on his temples, despite the cold weather. Shaw knew. Shaw had always known. He had lied. And now he realized that he had been exposed. What? The betrayer's voice cracked. James took another step forward, his eyes empty. You lied to me, Chris. The crowd murmured. People began to back away, as if instinctively understanding that something terrible was about to happen. Shaw swallowed, raised his hands, trying to compose himself. James, this is some misunderstanding. James repeated. His voice was even, almost lazy, but it carried such a chill that the workers holding shovels involuntarily began to move. Damn, stop. Shaw turned sharply, intending to run. But he only took 2 steps before bumping into the massive body of one of the guards. A hand landed on his shoulder. Slowly, heavily, on your knees. James no longer raised his voice. He didn't need to. Shaw frantically turned around, his eyes darting from face to face. Please, James, we're friends. Coulter stepped closer. You took the money. Today you will die for it. Christopher's face twisted in horror. And no, wait. I can explain. James no longer listened. He felt nothing. Only a dull, icy satisfaction from the realization that the first traitor would today lie in the very earth where he was supposed to lie. Shaw tried to break free. The guard hit him in the knee, and he fell into the mud with a scream. His eyes twitched, filled with insane fear. James calmly repeated, buttoning the cuff of his coat. Shovels plunged into the earth. The rain poured harder. Mark stood at the freshly dug grave, but inside him there was nothing left but a smoldering, all-consuming rage. It pulsed in his temples, squeezed his chest, spread through his veins, causing his fingers to tremble with anger. He felt neither the cold nor the rain that now not only drizzled but lashed with full force, running in icy streams down his face, mixing with sweat beads. She is alive. She is alive. These 2 words hammered in his head like gunshots, like blows to the chest. He abruptly tore off his black tie, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it onto the wet earth. People still stood around, but now it didn't matter. Their whispers, their looks, their misunderstanding, all dissolved into white noise, deaf and monotonous, like ringing in the ears after an explosion. His security detail froze beside him. For men, trained under his command, who had served him faithfully for many years, watched him with tense faces. They didn't ask what was happening. They knew him too well to ask unnecessary questions. Get the car. Now. His voice sounded dull, even emotionless. But in that icy silence, a hurricane was hidden. One of the guards, Kevin, nodded and immediately dashed to the armored Cadillac Escalade parked at the cemetery gate. The engine roared, the headlights flashed. Another, Tom, stepped forward, frowning. Boss, are you sure you want to go right now? Maybe we should first. Mark sharply turned his head. His look was such that Tom instantly fell silent, as if he had been struck in the face. I don't repeat myself. A deafening pause. The guard nodded, stepping back, understanding that Mark was in a state where it was better not to stop him. Heavy steps on the wet ground. Mark got behind the wheel. The door slammed so hard that it seemed the whole car shook. He didn't buckle up. There was no time. He pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The tires screeched, gripping the wet asphalt, and the SUV lurched forward, splashing water from puddles. The road before him blurred. Streets, lamps, passing cars, all merged into smeared stripes, turning into mere backdrops against his singular focus. His home, the place where she was supposed to be dead, the place where he had just seen her alive, arching beneath another man, in the place where she had sworn fidelity to him. Empires fall, states crumble, but nothing compares to the devastation that betrayal brings. He ran a red light. Horns blared. Someone shouted as the massive SUV nearly took out an old Ford on a turn. He didn't brake. His eyes were fixed on the road, but he wasn't really seeing it. Before him was the phone screen. Her moans, her body, her eyes, looking into the camera as if she knew he would see. What the hell? What the fucking hell? He sped through 2 more blocks. Ahead, the massive, wrought iron gates of his mansion were already visible. Home. The damn den of lies. The guard at the gate didn't even have time to blink as Mark forcefully hit the intercom button. Open up. Boss, what's hap? Damn it, open. The sound of metal bolts unlocking. The gates began to slide apart. He didn't wait for them to fully open. He floored the accelerator. The Cadillac squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping its sides against the metal gates. In the courtyard, one of the guards stood on the porch, not understanding what was happening. Mark leaped out of the car even before it had fully stopped. His boots slammed into the wet stone of the driveway. He sprinted up the steps, shouldering through the massive front door. A crash. A crack. The guard rushed toward him, but Mark, with a precise blow to the chest, knocked him off his feet. Where is she? Boss, what's the... He didn't finish. The dull sound of impact. The body fell to the parquet floor. Mark didn't stop. Through the hall. Down the corridor. Upstairs to the bedroom. He burst into the room. The door cracked off its hinges, slamming against the wall. His breathing was heavy, sharp, predatory. But the bedroom was empty. The bed was perfectly made. No signs. No foreign objects. No wife. Only emptiness. A silence more deafening than an explosion. He stepped forward. Stopped. His chest heaved, his fist clenched white. Where was she? Where was the man who had just been screwing her here on this bed? Where the hell was she now? His world was about to collapse. The room was enveloped in dead silence. Rain drummed on the windows, howling in the night, but inside the house, inside this bedroom where everything was supposed to fall apart, there was nothing. Mark stood, breathing heavily, feeling his chest rise and fall too slowly, too sharply. Empty. The bed was made without a single wrinkle. The air didn't even carry a trace of her scent, as if no one had ever been here. But he had seen her here, her body writhing in ecstasy, her eyes full of fire. She had been here. She had been happy. But where was she now? Where the hell was she now? His gaze jerked to the side. His fingers reflexively slid into his jacket pocket, pulling out the phone. The screen was still lit. The live broadcast had turned off, but the recording file was still accessible. He pressed play. Video footage. 6 hours old. Mark stared at the screen. The same scene he had seen just minutes earlier was playing. Her body shuddering with pleasure. Her lips open in moans. The man grasping her waist, pressing her into the bed. But something had changed. On the screen, she abruptly stopped, rolled on her back, and looked into the camera, as if she knew he would be watching, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Her lips quivered, and she whispered something, but there was no sound. Mark squinted. She was saying, "You're too late." His heart thudded once. "You're too late, Mark." Where's the sound? He hit the volume control, but all he heard was a deafening, empty silence. And then she smiled, easily, casually, as if all of this was a joke, as if it was a theater played out solely for him. Bang! The phone cracked in his fist. Thunder. Mark threw his head back, exhaled, and closed his eyes. Fire. Everything burned inside him. She didn't just betray him. She had planned all. She knew. She left this spectacle for him. She wanted him to watch, to see. And by the time he saw, she was already far away. All this was planned. Mark slowly turned his head. His guard stood in the doorway of the bedroom. Kevin, Tom, Rodriguez. Their faces were alert, but not surprised. They didn't try to say anything, made no unnecessary movements. Because they knew, because they weren't on it. He could have been oblivious, might have believed it was all coincidental, but there were no coincidences, not in his world. He looked at Tom. Tom averted his gaze first. Mistake. Mark slowly took a step forward. The guards tensed up. Who? His voice was hoarse, sharp as a drawn wire. Silence. Who helped her? Kevin glanced at Tom. Rodriguez took a step back. Tom's eyes twitched. Mark watched. A second. 2. 3. And then he simply pulled out a gun. Shot. Tom fell to his knees, clutching his chest where the bullet struck. Boss. Shot. The body hit the floor. The others didn't move. Mark didn't blink. He turned to Kevin. Kevin swallowed. Who else? Mark, it's business. We were just following orders. She gave us money, a lot of money. She shot. Kevin fell backwards, gasping, blood soaking the white carpet. Rodriguez froze, motionless. Eyes wide, hands raised. Boss. Mark slowly turned to him. Please. A second. Silence. Then Mark stepped closer, crouched in front of him. You saw her. You let her go. Mark, she would have. She is dead to me. Rodriguez swallowed. Boss, please. Mark leaned closer. You will die quickly. Shot. Rodriguez's head jerked back. His body settled onto the floor. Mark exhaled, stood up, reloaded the gun, turned to the remaining guards, who stood at the threshold, silently watching, unmoving. I pay you. His voice was gone. Only steel remained. I give you everything. They didn't stir. I did not forgive you. He slowly scanned the remaining ones. Who else? Silence. Long dead. Then someone stepped forward. Nobody, sir. Mark watched, felt the smell of blood, felt the emptiness inside. You work for me. You die for me. Someone nodded. And if anyone betrays me. He stepped closer. They didn't move. You saw what happens. He holstered his gun, turned around, and he left the room. She is dead. He will find her and make it a reality. The rain did not let up. It beat on the roof, streaming in cold rivulets down the windows, pounding on the wet asphalt outside the mansion. The smell of gunpowder and blood still hung in the air, embedding itself in the carpets, furniture, walls. Mark Coulter stood in the center of the room, looking at the motionless bodies of his former guards, those who chose money over loyalty. His hand slowly loosened its grip on the pistol. The slide was hot, smoking, but inside him, it was even hotter. He exhaled. His wife was alive. The words again struck his mind like a red-hot nail. She didn't just betray him. She destroyed everything they had built together. But before he could understand why, before he could decide exactly how he would make her pay, he needed to go back. Back to where this spectacle began. He walked over to the bar in the corner of the room, took a bottle of whiskey, and splashed them into a glass. The drink sloshed as he held the glass in his fingers, staring into it as if trying to see the past. And it came back to him clearly like a gunshot. 9 days ago, Washington, à quel accident. It was late evening. Mark was sitting in his office at Aegis Security, reviewing reports on current operations, when the phone rang. It was Christopher Shaw, the man who now lay in his living room with a hole in his chest. Boss. Chris's voice trembled, though he tried hard to remain calm. We have a situation. It's Lily. Mark instantly tensed. Lily, his wife. He grabbed the phone, so hard his knuckles whitened. Speak. She's dead. The world stopped. Where are you? His voice was hollow but icy. North Highway. Mark, her car. But he was no longer listening. 30 minutes later. North Highway. Red and blue lights from the emergency vehicles cast harsh shadows on the wet asphalt. Raindrops fell on the black metal of the overturned car, twisted and charred as if it had been swallowed by hellfire and spat back out. Firefighters were working around, pulling out the charred remains of the car. Police officers stood off to the side, talking among themselves, but everything stopped when Mark arrived. He got out of the car, not even bothering to close the door. Chris Shaw stood nearby, his face ashen, as if he had been wrung out. Where is she? Mark didn't even look at him. Chris nervously swallowed and nodded towards the car. The body in the trunk. Mark froze. The trunk? Why there? He moved forward. No one tried to stop him. One of the firefighters opened the trunk. The smell. Burnt flesh. Plastic. Metal. He didn't remember stepping forward, leaning in. The body was charred beyond recognition. A woman, identifiable only by the jewelry that remained intact. Her ring, her necklace, her watch, which he had given her 2 years ago. His heart pounded in his ears. He felt nothing, heard no voices, didn't hear Chris tentatively touching his shoulder. Mark, Sully. He didn't respond. Lily, she is dead. Present time. The glass in Mark's hand cracked. He blinked, returning to reality, feeling the blood slowly trickle down his palm from the shards of the glass. His fingers unclenched. The glass fell to the floor. She orchestrated everything, every detail, the fake body, the forged evidence, the money she paid his people. It was all part of her plan. He loved her so much that he once would have died for her. Who was she to him? Lily Seymour. 12 years ago. New York. Their first meeting. It was a social party he had attended against his will. He was just starting to build his empire, transitioning from the military sector to private. There were people there he needed to make connections with. But he hated those kinds of people. And that was when he saw her. She was standing at the bar, laughing, head thrown back. And in that moment, he realized she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Tall, slender, mysterious. There was a fire in her eyes he had never seen in any other woman before. She looked at him and approached first. Do you always look like you're assessing threats? He slightly raised an eyebrow. Habit. What if I say it's a bad habit? Then you're the threat. She smiled. I'm a friend, Mark. Remember that. And he believed her. He loved her. He trusted her. He built a life with her. And now she had destroyed everything. She is dead to him. But he will find her. And she will find out what it means to truly be dead. In the office, dead silence reigned. The only source of light was the monitor screen, bathing everything in a cold, bluish glow. Mark sat behind the massive oak desk, his fingers rhythmically tapping on the lacquered surface. Before him lay figures, accounts, transactions, transfers. Dollar by dollar, his fortune was disappearing. Just that morning, he was the owner of a multi-million-dollar company, controlling vast assets, real estate, and accounts in various countries. Now, just hours after learning that his wife was alive, he realized he owned nothing. The day before her staged death, Lily had transferred all assets to her name. With every keystroke, with every new document he opened, everything fell into place in his mind. This plan hadn't been conceived in a day, not even in a month. She had been working on it for years. Gradually, carefully, methodically. And he, like the last fool, hadn't seen the obvious. But the worst was yet to come. He opened the legal documents they had signed 3 years ago. At the time, it seemed like a simple agreement, just another element of their marriage, standard precaution for wealthy people. The contract stated that in the event of the death of one spouse, their share of the business and property would not pass to the other, but would go entirely to the official heirs. And since she was dead, now everything belonged to her family. Legally, he could not claim it back. It was a trap, and he had signed his own defeat. Mark leaned back in his chair, clenching his jaws so tightly that his temples thudded with tension. She had used him for years. Every I love you, every look, every touch. It was all a lie. He had become a pawn in her game, but she had miscalculated, because now he was playing by his own rules. Grinding his teeth, he turned his attention back to the screen. If she had been planning her escape all this time, she must have had help. He needed to find out who had assisted her. Reviewing bank transfers over the last 6 months, he noticed something odd. Money had been regularly deposited into Lily's personal account. Not once, not twice, but regularly. And the amounts were substantial. $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. But the most interesting part was not this. All the transfers came from one person. Robert Hale, Lily's personal lawyer. The man she trusted. The man who was supposed to protect their interests. The man who, essentially, had orchestrated this plan with her. But now he was not just her lawyer. He was her lover. Mark's heart beat evenly, heavily, harshly. Every time he thought it couldn't get any worse, this woman found a way to prove him wrong. Hale, the bastard, hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. He sent the money directly to her account, not hiding it. He knew no one would dig deeper, because it was all settled. But now everything had changed. Mark opened another database. He knew how to look for such people. Hale couldn't just disappear. If he really had run away with Lily, they must have left a trail. Careless, barely perceptible, but he would find it. He would shatter their plan to pieces, just as they had shattered his life. His fingers slowly reached for the phone. Dial tone. 1, 2, 3. The voice on the other end of the line was raspy, sleepy. Yes. Find me Robert Hale. Pause. Are you sure? This guy isn't just some small fry. He has connections. Mark smirked, coldly, without emotion. I have weapons. Give me a couple of days. You have 12 hours. Click. The line went dead. Mark set down the phone. He was no longer a pawn. Now he was the hunter. Barcelona, a city of bright lights and endless parties, welcomed a new night, filling the streets with tourist laughter and the smells of expensive cigars. To those visiting for the first time, it showed only its superficial beauty. Ancient buildings, cobblestone streets, luxurious restaurants. But Mark knew that behind this facade lay a different world. A world where power was measured not by money but by fear, where people disappeared without a trace, and deals were made under the sights of rifles. And it was in this world that he felt at home. In a small dark room, hidden deep in an old building, Mark sat in front of 3 monitors, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screens. Endless rows of data, interspersed with satellite maps and bank statements, filled the space in front of him. His gaze did not waver from the figures that formed a cohesive picture. Lily might have been smart, cunning, calculating, but she was no ghost. Every skilled fugitive leaves a trail, and she had made a mistake. Money. Money always gives a person away, no matter the tricks they use. He knew she hadn't forsaken it, couldn't forsake it, because it was her true passion. First, he found her accounts. The day before her death, she transferred a significant sum to an offshore bank in Barcelona. Then another transfer to a private account registered under another name. But the system revealed a connection between her previous operations and the new account. Mark clenched his teeth, staring at the latest transaction, a luxury villa rental in an upscale area, right on the coast. All too easy, all too obvious, and it infuriated him. They weren't hiding, they weren't being discreet, they were celebrating their victory. He looked at the list of transactions. Car numbers, payment details, her signature, and not only hers. Robertale, Lily's personal attorney, the one who was supposed to safeguard their interests, protect their capital, but instead helped her destroy his life. Now he knew that Hale was not just her lawyer. He was her lover, an accomplice, co-author of this plan. For years, they had been preparing this move, paving the way for his downfall, refining the details, while he, blindly trusting the woman he loved, gave them the opportunity to strike the final blow. Mark ran his tongue over his dry lips, feeling a dull, cold rage growing in his chest. He had to blow up that villa to smithereens, incinerate it to the ground along with them. But killing was too simple. He wanted them to feel fear, to realize that their celebration was a mistake, to understand that not in a single moment, but gradually, as each step left them with nothing but terror and pain. He reached for the phone, quickly dialed a number. 3 short rings before a voice answered, raspy and slightly annoyed. Yes, I need a meeting. Immediately. Do you even know what time it is? I don't care. Pause. Then a short sigh, the sound of movement, and the voice became more collected. Where? Warehouse at the port. 30 minutes. There was no response, just the click of the call being dropped. Mark put the phone in his pocket, grabbed his jacket, and left the room, heading for the exit. It took less than 20 minutes before he arrived at the old port warehouse, hidden from the eyes of tourists and outsiders. He got out of the car, stepped inside, and immediately all conversations ceased. Inside the dark space were 5 men, people he had known for a long time, those he had once saved, those who owed him. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a bearded face stood up and moved towards him. It's been a while, Coulter. Mark nodded, scanning the others. I need a team. Immediately. The man smirked, but his eyes remained cold. How big is the job? No weaknesses. Where? Private villa in an upscale area by the coast. Ooh. Mark slowly pulled out his phone, opened 2 photos, and placed them on the table before them. Her, him, and everyone with them. They looked at the photos. For a second, silence fell. Then one of the guys snorted. Damn, Mark, is that your wife? He looked at the speaker. Was. Hell, what did she do? Destroyed everything. The men exchanged glances, then the tall man nodded. So you don't want it quick. They don't deserve a quick end. Is this revenge? Mark shook his head. No, it's a lesson. Silence hung in the room again. Everyone was quiet, reflecting on what had been said. Then the leader nodded. Give us 6 hours. You have 3. The man grimaced, but said nothing. Mark nodded, turned around, and headed for the exit. They thought they had won. They thought they had destroyed him, that he was broken, that he could be crossed out of the equation like an unnecessary variable. But they forgot who he was before the rich life. Now he was not the victim. Now he was the hunter. The night in Barcelona was warm, but inside the private villa on the coast, cold fear prevailed. Outside, the ocean roared, waves gently breaking on the rocks. But for those inside the house, time seemed to have stopped. 6 armed men, 3 inside, 3 on the perimeter. They didn't know that death was already knocking at the door. The assault begins moments earlier. Mark Halter stood on the roof of a neighboring building, watching the house through a thermal imager. Target 1, the lover, Robert Hale, in the study on the 2nd floor, drinking wine. Target 2, Lily, downstairs in the living room, sitting on a sofa, talking on the phone. Target 3, guard number 1, in the kitchen, checking surveillance cameras. Target 4, guard number 2, in the corridor, smoking. Target 5, guard number 3, outside, patrolling the backyard. Target 6, guard number 4, at the main entrance, browsing news on his phone. Mark took a deep breath. Kill the lights. One of his men pressed a button on the controller. The villa plunged into total darkness. Panic begins, shouts and curses erupted inside the house. What the hell? Boss, the cameras went out. Check the fuse box. 3, 2, 1. Explosion. The kitchen window shatters. A smoke grenade flies in. The guard by the monitors begins to choke. He tries to escape, but in the next second, he receives a knife under the ribs. A muffled gasp. His body collapses on the marble floor. Upstairs, Robert Hale jumps from his chair, dropping his wine glass. Lily, what's happening? Lily no longer responds. She runs. She knows. She feels. This darkness is not accidental. This chaos is organized. And Mark is here. She realizes it's the end. Another muffled groan echoes in the corridor. Guard number 2 falls face down, his head blown open by a silenced gunshot. Mark moves like a shadow. Quiet, methodical, merciless. He leaves no chance for survival. Only 3 remain. Lily, Hale, and the last guard at the entrance, who still doesn't understand what's happening. Outside, the guard hears a rustle behind him. He turns, but sees only the barrel of a gun. A gunshot. The body falls into the pool, blood spreading in the water like red ink. Lily runs. She's in the corridor. Bare feet slip on marble. Her heart beats, so loud it seems about to burst. She tries to reach the emergency exit, but stops before the door. Before her stands a silhouette. Broad shoulders. Cold eyes. Mark, where are you rushing to, dear? Lily steps back. She trembles. She realizes this is the end. Mar, shut up. He steps closer, and she chokes on air. Please. Mark doesn't even look at her. She's no longer a person in his eyes. Just trash. Just a mistake that needs to be corrected. But first, Hale. The lover tries to escape upstairs noise. Mark turns to Lily. If you move, I'll slit your throat right here. He leaves her there like a pathetic broken doll and climbs upstairs. In the study, Hale is panicking. Bitch, bitch, bitch. He pulls out a suitcase, shoves cash into it. Where's the damn phone? He hears footsteps. Freezes. His breathing stops. He knows who it is. The door swings open. In the doorway stood Mark, his pistol lowered, but his eyes were killing already. Hale made a stupid mistake. He grabbed a desk lamp and threw it at Mark. Mistake. A gunshot followed. The bullet hit the wall next to Hale's head, making him whimper. He fell to his knees. Brother, listen, just hear me out. Mark slowly approached. You thought you stole my life. He stood over him, looking down. But I came for yours. Hale started to cry. Mark, for God's sake, I can't pay. I can leave. Just give me a chance. A chance. Mark laughed, but there was no joy in his eyes. You already used your chance, Robbie. Mark placed the pistol on the table. Then he pulled out a knife. You always were talkative, weren't you? Robert started screaming. But the house's soundproofing was too good. No one would hear, not even Lily. She was sitting downstairs, trembling, covering her face with her hands. She couldn't see, but she knew that now Mark would decide who dies first. And perhaps it wouldn't be her. Lily sat on the cold marble floor of the living room, her back pressed against the sofa. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit, but she knew there was nowhere to run. The house was dead silent, a silence filled with anticipation. Somewhere upstairs, a deathly scream echoed, dull and prolonged, full of primal terror. Then it all went quiet. She shuddered, curled up, feeling something inside her break. He had killed Robert. He was coming for her. Footsteps slowly echoed on the staircase. Dull, even unhurried. Leather soles slid across marble so effortlessly it seemed as if death itself was descending to her in the form of the man she once called hers. Lily lifted her head. Mark was calm, dangerously calm. Drops of someone else's blood speckled his shirt sleeves like random strokes of paint on a clean canvas. His face remained clean, smooth, only a hint of a smile lurking at the corners of his lips. His eyes, empty, cold, dark like a deep pool. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He stopped a few steps away, lowered his head, examining her, as if she were something less than human. "You're trembling." She wanted to turn away, but she couldn't. Mark, are you afraid of me?" She swallowed hard. She needed to speak, needed to say something. "I didn't think it would turn out like this. He tasted her word as if sampling it on his tongue. "Like this, Lily." His voice was soft, velvety, and that made it even more terrifying. "You knew I would find you." You wanted me to find?" "Mark." She breathed out his name almost as a whisper, like a prayer. He leaned in closer, looming over her. "You wanted me to see." Lily clenched her eyes shut. He waited for her to look at him. "Look at me, Lily." She trembled. "Look, or I'll break your fingers right here." Her eyelashes fluttered. She reluctantly raised her gaze. His smile widened. "Good girl." Her chest heaved heavily, her lungs struggling to draw air. She needed to say something that would stop him. And then Lily said the only thing that came to mind. "I know you, Mark." He tilted his head slightly. "You won't kill me." A moment of silence. Then he smiled. Not just a smile. He laughed. Quietly. Raspy. Devilishly. "You forgot." He raised his hand, brushing away a wet lock of her hair. "I've been dead since the moment I got that video." She didn't have time to scream. He grabbed her by the hair, yanked her up, forcing her to her knees. "Want to play a game, Lily?" She choked. "You like games, don't you?" She sobbed, tried to pull away, but he tightened his grip. "Mark, please. You used to be likable." His voice was so calm, as if he wasn't holding the woman he was about to break, as if it didn't matter. "You were beautiful, smart." He moved closer. Her breathing was erratic. "You were mine." Lily closed her eyes. Then he yanked her back. Her body crashed into a glass table, shattering it. Shards of glass cut into her skin. A scream. But Mark didn't give her even a moment to feel the pain. He lifted her again, ran a finger across her face, then roughly grabbed her chin. "I want you to feel everything." She whimpered. He slowly traced a knife blade across her cheek. "I want you to know what it means to be afraid." She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "You will beg." Mark leaned close to her ear. "But no one will hear you." Lily trembled. Her lips quivered. Her breaths came in spasmodic gasps, and blood trickled down her cheek, a thin red line left by the knife blade. She dared not even whimper, dared not show weakness, though inside her there was nothing left but fear and panic. He wasn't joking. Every cell in her body felt it. She knew Mark, knew him better than anyone, and she knew that the man standing before her now was not the one she had married. That Mark was dead. All that remained was the one holding her now, cold, merciless, irrevocably doomed to vengeance. She wheezed, clutching at his hand, trying to loosen his iron grip. Mark, listen to me." He tilted his head, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "I'm listening." Lily froze. Maybe she still had a chance. Maybe he could still forgive her. Her eyes darted around, fingers digging into his wrist. I can fix this." He raised an eyebrow. "Fix it?" She nodded quickly. Yes, Mark. Don't you remember how good we were together? I was yours. I've always been yours." "You're wrong." He shoved her back abruptly, and she collapsed on her knees, shaking with uncontrollable fear. She felt insignificant, Mark had once looked at her with love, with desire. Now, there was nothing in his gaze. Nothing. She grabbed at his legs, desperately searching for a way out. Any way to survive. Mark, I'll do whatever you say. He leaned down, grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to lift her head. Now you're obedient? Yes. She nodded frantically, clutching his sleeve. I'll do anything you want. Any word, any wish. I'm yours, only yours. He smiled, and that smile made her shudder. He realized it too late. He released his grip, and she collapsed onto the marble again. No, no, she whispered, biting her lip until it bled. You can forget this, Mark. You can forget everything. She crawled closer, her fingers sliding up his shirt, carefully touching his chest. You loved me once, didn't you? He didn't move away. Not immediately. She felt hope. For a second. A fleeting moment. I can be your wife again. I can be the woman you once knew. Her fingers traced upward to his neck, lifting slightly. I can prove it to you. Prove. He repeated the word, amused, as if it entertained him. She met his gaze. Dark. Hollow. Dead. His hand suddenly seized her wrist, bending it backward. I told you, I've been dead since the moment I saw that video. She screamed as her joints creaked under his fingers. But you didn't understand. He shoved her aside, and she fell on her back, gasping for air. You still think you can deceive me? She shook her head frantically. No, Mark, you think your body still matters to me? She covered her mouth with her hands. I can disappear. She exhaled, choking on her words. You'll never see me again. I'll leave, I swear. Just let me go, and I'll disappear. She was sobbing now, truly sobbing. She knew he wouldn't change his mind, but he wasn't killing her. His gaze flickered between her eyes. He was enjoying it, enjoying the same fear that had consumed him when he watched that video. She trembled before him, just as he had trembled then, clutching his phone, realizing that his entire life had been destroyed. He wouldn't kill her quickly. She would feel everything. He would make sure she understood, that she lived in fear, just like him. Lily crawled backward, her bloodied fingers slipping on the cold marble. Her breaths were ragged, terror clouding her vision in a way she had never experienced before. Mark stood over her, a tall, dark silhouette against the fire already spreading through the villa. Flames licked at the curtains, glass vases cracked from the heat, and the air was thick with the bitter scent of smoke and ash. She choked on her sobs, trying to speak. Mark, please. He tilted his head, watching her as if she were something less than human. She was merely a shadow of the woman he had once known. You've already begged. His voice was steady, almost lazy. He wiped the knife blade on her dress and slowly slid it back into its sheath. Lily froze, her chest heaving, her face slick with sweat and tears. You won't kill me. She whispered it, barely more than a plea. You can't. He stared at her for a long time. Then he smirked. No, Lily. He turned away. She gasped in shock. And no, her voice cracked. No, don't leave me. She crawled after him, hands shaking, legs failing her. Mark, he was already walking away. Don't leave me here. Please. I'll do anything you want. Mark didn't look back. He stepped into the shadows, leaving her in the fiery hell. Flames engulfed the walls. The ceiling cracked, raining down sparks and smoke. Lily screamed. She screamed his name, screamed for forgiveness, screamed, begging for one more chance. But he didn't stop. He stepped outside the villa, where his men were already waiting. The house was ablaze. Her hell was only beginning. One of his men, Kurt, glanced his way, watching as the flames devoured the remnants of lies and betrayal. What now? Mark inhaled the smoke-filled air, wiping the blood from his fingers. Now I'm free. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the woman who had betrayed him. She thought she had destroyed him. She thought she had stolen everything from him. But he had taken himself back. Not the money, not the property, his honor. The fire continued to burn behind him, lighting his path as he walked into the night. The man who had died the day he received that video had finally found peace.